All right, everyone here, I'm sure, has felt anger. Most of us were never really taught what it's actually for. We were told to manage it, suppress it, or if we're going to express it, we do so very carefully. And so today, we're going to explore the rage instinct as a signal through the framework of integrative self-analysis. And to do that, I'm joined by founder of Integrative Self-Analysis, Michael Walker.
Thanks for having me. We've been doing this for a while.
We have. So Michael, to kind of kick things off, what do you see is missing in how psychology currently understands emotion?
My experience with traditional therapy, and this is also not just therapy, this is also medicine, because they're intimately tied together. So if you go to a therapist, you can get prescription drugs for your psychological issues. So the problem with modern therapy is that whether they know it or not, they work from a top-down model, meaning if you can change the way a person thinks, you can change the way they feel. And ISA is completely different than that. Based on my experience, and then also based on the most modern research, I think it's the opposite. I think that the psyche works from the bottom up and is dynamically made from the instincts all the way up to the autonomic nervous system, to the immune system, to the endocrine system, and then eventually on how you think. So if you want to think better, you have to learn how to feel better first.
I can imagine some people in the audience thinking that that's a daunting task, because maybe they've been trying to feel better their whole lives.
So this is who we normally see are going to be people who have exhausted psychological therapies, they've exhausted self-help, they've exhausted spiritual practices. They're exhausted because many of them are working from the top-down model of, if we can fix the way you think, then you're going to feel better, but they never do. And so you're correct that the people are going to be, they're not going to understand what I'm saying. The average person who's hearing this is not going to understand what I'm saying. The important part is that when you do the work with us, we're working with your feelings, we're working with your instincts, we're working with your body, and there's a way to communicate to that, and there's a way for you to become conscious of it, but it's not through thinking about it. And so the very nature of this question is like, I'm going to help you understand what we're going to do by helping you think about the logic of what we're doing. And the work we're doing is hitting at on a deeper level than ego or logic.
So we're kind of pointing to something that's mapped out in the integrative self-analysis framework. It's this concept of an instinctual consciousness, and that there's a communication, a form of communication or a way of communicating with us. What is this instinctual consciousness, and how does it communicate with us?
The instinctual consciousness, it's an important concept, but as a person who's working with integrative self-analysis, you don't need to know all of the theoretical frameworks. But it's important that we use the words, because the words that we have for these things, they really do mean something. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing is that, because integrative self-analysis is self-analysis, you are the primary person that's responsible for your own healing and your mental well-being. It's not me or another person or the doctor or whoever's working with you or your parents. You have the best insight into yourself. So one of the things that we do is we talk about these principles, and we talk about neuroscience and things like that. But you're not required to know it. But at the same time, if we say everything like a 5-year-old, we're still making you a student to a teacher, a patient to a doctor. What we're trying to do is at the same time encourage you to become powerful and to encourage you to become educated in your own psychology and your own physical health. So when we use the word instinctual consciousness, don't be afraid. It just means that there's a much deeper, wiser part of you that's connected to your instincts, it's connected to your DNA, it's connected to your immune system, it's connected to your endocrine system, so your hormonal system, your testosterone, your estrogen, your oxytocin. You don't have to know all these because you experience them all day long. You intimately know when you have enough of it and when you don't have enough of it. So don't be afraid of instinctual consciousness, but understand that this framework of an instinctual consciousness is where we think the instinct and consciousness truly sits. And modern science is proving this. So, and it's not in I'm thinking right now or my ego self-awareness, which I call cognition. So I'm differentiating between consciousness and cognition. So we're dealing with instinctual consciousness. Most of the time, people are going to want to interpret that as ego cognition or self-awareness, and that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, okay, so you've kind of defined in a loose way what this instinctual consciousness is. I've heard you call it the soul as well as like a synonym. But it's not, you've indicated it's not ungrounded. It's actually based in science and reality. It's not an esoteric, misty concept that we often associate with ideas like the soul. Is that correct?
When I refer to the instinctual consciousness as soul, it's doing a number of things. The first part that most people will have a knee-jerk reaction to, or at least question, is this religious? And working with integrative self-analysis does not require you to believe or have a religious faith. That's a very important that people understand that. The reason I use the word soul is because my own background, I am coming from a Christian mysticism type of background, which is more like your Saint Francis of Assisi type of thing. I'm not pushing that on people, but because I've created integrative self-analysis, the reason I was able to do this work was because I could think outside of the box, and to me, the divine allows me to get out of my ego mind. It allows me to push further beyond the limits of science or logic, because we have a tendency, in my opinion, to reduce very complex dynamic systems to very small areas of thought, like science, or psychology. And you need to be able to, in order to tap into the instinctual consciousness, you need to be able to tap into something bigger than yourself, something bigger than your own identity as you see yourself. We tend to put everything in a modern lens of everything is relative. And one of the things I found out with doing this work and healing my complex trauma was that you can't reduce things. You need to be able to expand yourself into possibilities and not be limited to such a small framework. A lot of times with the modern sciences, they don't deal with what religious calls the ontology, meaning what is the primary foundation of where whatever you're dealing with, where did it come from? So then they basically just say, well, we don't know, but here's where we're at. It could be a big bang, it could be this, it could be that. But these questions for me are important, because one of the ways that I was able to put the pieces together was to, instead of saying that the world is just dead and full of dead matter and the only meaning that's in it is what we give it, that was too limiting for me. So to believe that there are origins beyond just accidental things. It allowed me to see the continuity. It allowed me to see that there's a deep consciousness at the very least behind reality, and behind your body, and behind your endocrine system, and behind your immune system and your instincts. There's something bringing that together, and that is also what allowed me to see so clearly how dreams, all the imagery, even though it seems completely nonsensical, how it completely was interacting and was conscious of much deeper things. So this is why I refer to it as soul, because if I say it's just an instinct, most people are going to go, oh, you mean like an animal? Yeah, but not. And if I just make it religious, then it doesn't deal with the neuroscience and the instinctual necessities that we have. And then at some point you can get into all kinds of weird religious abstractions that allow you to do just about anything the same way that science does. So it's a instinctual consciousness, and I'll use that when we need to talk about, you are a physical person right now, and you have needs, and you have functions that you cannot avoid. But but at the same time, when I need for you to think outside of the box, I don't want to refer to it as instincts. I want to refer to it as soul, because there's something larger. There's a consciousness that's tying things together, and we need to move into that.
So we're talking about instincts, and we're talking about instinctual consciousness. Some people may not understand what an instinct is.
Well, instinct can mean a lot of things. There are two main things that I want to say. I want to say how great the neuroscience is on telling us exactly what we mean by instincts now. And we also have to deal with a bias of how people interpret instincts. So first, I'll start with the bias. The bias is that cognitive behavioral therapy is the main therapy. So you fix your mind, you fix everything. And that bias is based on completely ignoring or mocking Sigmund Freud. The neuroscience has now proven that Sigmund Freud was right, that there are instincts that are actually running what you think. This is why Freud and his pupil Jung were able to do free association, who understood free association, and bring that to the forefront, because the instincts were actually interconnecting. Your cognition doesn't even know that you're connecting things, but when you do free association, or you do word association, which Carl Jung did, whether the person's conscious of what they're saying or not, their instincts are actually propelling them to tell on themselves. And now we have the neuroscience to do that. So in the early 1920s, Freud did an essay and said he doesn't have the science right now to prove his instincts. He's only doing it based on his seeing the clients and his phenomenology, as they would say, of the experience and how he's interacting with it. But he said one day there'll be a science that will show that this is true, and it will be more than just the instincts that I think there are. And he thought there was a death instinct, and he thought there was a libidinal instinct, an erotic instinct. And you can see that he based all of his work on that. Well, that eventually got laughed at in favor of cognition, and that the body and that the brain and the body is just moved by electrical impulses. And you could fix the brain physically, or give it chemicals, or you can reprogram the mind in behavioralism. The science that we have is the work of Jaak Panksepp. He had figured out there are 7 emotional centers, and this was tested. He's a neuroscientist, and he could actually send electrical impulses into each one and get the emotion to happen, which would turn on seconds before, the actual thinking process that the person thought they were doing because they wanted to think it. So the reality is when we say instincts, we are talking primarily about the Pankseppian instincts.